Hey, good afternoon, and welcome to yet another edition of Team Tim Live. And Tim Golden back here from ChannelCon last week, actually. So hope you all survived the week last week without me. I'm sure y'all did. So quick little recap. ChannelCon was great. If you're not a member of CompTIA and you've not been to a ChannelCon event, you should go see our friends Wayne and others over at ChannelCon and just get signed up, do the CompTIA thing. It's a really great program. So anyways, wow, we have like Hollywood Squares going on here. This is very confusing. I'm like, who is like, I don't even know where the hell to start.
I like to invite people on the show, Tim. So,
yeah. So, you know what?
Perspectives here. So, we got to get them on.
Exactly. So since Tim is talking, you do your little introduction, my friend.
Sure. So, Team Tim Schnur, work at Cavello. We do this weekly podcast to talk about insights in cybersecurity, typically for MSPs and MSSPs, but we also like to talk about challenges with InfoSec, right? and enterprise IT as well. So excited for another week. I think we got a great topic here. Really trying to get some perspective and insights out there. If I probably asked some of you on the podcast right now during the week as they've made posts, LinkedIn posts, like what are some of your perspectives? So trying to be prepared, putting together the team here that we've got here today. We're really excited to talk about, data and metrics that actually engage, right? People actually care about. So cool.
Nice. And so, Dr. Miller, how are you? How was your week? I missed you last week. Say hello.
We did all right without you, Tim. We carried the mail.
It wasn't as fun, but we made it happen.
Dr. Miller with the like Dr. Zhivago voice going on over there. So we're just going to skip over to Chris. Hey, Chris, it's been a hot minute since we chatted. How you been? What's going on in your world over there at Cavello?
I'm great, Tim. Thanks for having me today. I appreciate it. I work with Tim Schnur and Phil, and here to talk about all things metrics related to MSPs, and happy to share in this discussion.
Nice. Awesome. Thank you so much. So yeah, I mean, Phil, this is the first time we're actually like virtually face-to-face. So nice to meet you. Hi, how are you? How's life there at Cavello? Are you up in Canada, eh?
Yeah, thanks, Tim. Long-time listener, first-time caller. Appreciate being here. Other Tim, I don't know if we can make this happen, but maybe we can make the squares work. That was a great intro. If I can get a high five. Other side. Other side. We'll get it next time.
Yeah, somewhere. We gotta practice. I think we gotta practice that. Oh, I got it. Ready, Tim? It's over to you.
Horrible.
Horrible. Lots of fun. And obviously, last but not least, Rich, tell us a little bit about yourself there over at, does that say Lockstock Cyber? It's really small font and I'm blind. So go ahead.
Yeah, Lockstock Cybersecurity and Analytics. We do cybersecurity consulting, and we try to tie everything that we do back to metrics to keep our clients very informed of the pulse of how things are going.
And so just so everybody on here and those in the comments are listening, like I believe Richard was a former police officer, SWAT team, SEAL Team 12, I don't know, something in the law enforcement. So we definitely have to keep some of this stuff on the DL because, we have the legal people here, the officers. So what is that all about? How do you go from like
journey? Yeah.
Parking attendant giving out parking I'm kidding. Tell us a little bit about that journey.
Well, I became a police officer when I was pretty young. I was 20 years old, still in college, and made the decision to go do that. It was really a great time, had a lot of great experiences. And this is back in the early 2000s. So this is the beginning of AOL Instant Messenger being used for harassing people and other types of crimes. Began to rise out of that, and I was interested in learning more, so I went back to school for mathematics of all things, and learned about cryptography and all kinds of things related to cybersecurity, and eventually went out and did my own thing.
Wow, that's pretty cool. So you're like the super smart guy here. You mentioned the maths, and yeah, 4 plus 2. Yeah, I'm good. So, and then Jesse, did you fix your audio, or are we gonna have to kick you off again?
We'll see. I don't know. How does it sound?
It sounds worse. Yeah. So,
Going back to Rich, talk about. I know you worked at a big bank. Talk a little bit about some of the cyber analytics that you were involved in, because I know we have some enterprise CISOs and security people on as well. So curious to hear about that.
So we had a lot of threat intelligence vendors that were providing us with a lot of data. And as typical for a large enterprise, if you have a lot of data coming in, it's difficult to get any information out of all that noise. So I spent a lot of time cleaning up data, trying to find different patterns that were actually useful to help protect our customers and help give information to different teams. Common problem, and also did some analytics on the analytics themselves to make sure that we were constantly getting in valuable information and making sure that our vendors are really providing that valuable information before we have that conversation or change up vendors, change up our data feeds.
Awesome. Okay, cool. Jesse, one more time.
I don't know. How does it sound?
And Rich, would you call that metadata?
Hey.
Yeah.
hey, there you are.
Yeah. Jesse Miller, Power PSA Consulting. I help MSPs build and scale security programs for profit. So interested. Yeah, I am super excited about this topic because I think one of the best pieces of value you can bring as an MSP to your customers is accurate, pertinent, and relevant data to help them drive security toward business outcomes. So with that, let's get into it.
Awesome. So put together a couple of slides this week, and we'll dive right into this. And
oh my goodness, I'm seeing acronym soup, says the dyslexic GRC guy, right?
Right. So think about some of these dashboards, right? Like some of these more advanced MSPs or even MSSPs are consistently, you walk into a SOC, right? Just, security operation command, like you're going to see maps on the wall and incidents handled or tickets handled, right? Like what's the burn down? How many incidents have we handled? Mean time to resolution is a common one. Vulnerabilities patched, vulnerabilities outstanding, firewall stats, phishing attempts. Yeah, what are SOCs? What are phishing attempts resisted, right, or like intercepted, right? Like so, there's typically a lot of cyber terminology and metrics we get buried in. You guys can jump in here. Jesse's been involved in a couple MSSPs as well. So, some of the usually these speak great to people that understand security, but how do we engage leadership, C-suite, non-technical people, the board, right? That to talk about like how are we actually moving the ball? How are we making things more secure, and how are we being effective? So that's what this slide just really like. I don't think those metrics, I think they're important, but I think the time and place for them probably isn't for leadership and security. And feel free, guys, comments, perspectives from the crowd. Like we'd love to put them up on the board here. So, Jesse, some great comments in the last couple 2 weeks. So you want to talk to this and talk about some of your metrics that when you work with clients, you think that really can engage them and motivate them, right, to actually get into a conversation or get them bought in.
Yeah, I think one of the most important things you do before you design any sort of metric, reporting, or feedback mechanism is understand who your audience is. Is your audience like ISIT management? Is it executive or IT leadership? Or is it the board or non-technical people? And I think once you figure out who that report is designed for, it informs the type of metrics you're bringing to that report. So top level, how are we doing metrics, right? That's executive team and the board. Clear and succinct roadmap review. Again, you're moving down to technical or maybe IT leadership. Hot stove tactical issues. Again, that can be things that the board is concerned about. I always like a heat map type of graphic where it says, here's the different domains, and here are some hot button risk items that we need to address. And then current initiatives and task progress. Now you're moving down into the people you're probably working with directly on a day-to-day basis more. So making sure we have, like I say, RCT, named resource, who commits to a time frame to complete something, whether it's from our side or from the client side, and then measuring against tasks. And I think when you're in those meetings, that's where MTTD and MTTR are important, because those are the people that are concerned with making sure that you're meeting your SLAs in terms of what services you're delivering for them, and they want to dig in. So I think having all those things in perspective as you deliver a report really serves to drive what the report looks like and what metrics matter to whom and why they matter.
How's that microphone treating you now? Obviously, thank you so much for that. Good stuff. Started fading out a little bit there with your crackly, raspy dinosaur voice. So I'm gonna do something about that, my friend.
And Tim, I got to go ahead. I got another comment I want to ask you on, because you know our friend Wes Spencer had he posted Andrew Solowski. I don't have it in front of me because you can pull it up. Do you know Andrew or not, Tim? But made comments like, he actually made a great comment that a dime of investment left of boom is worth $1 of investment right of boom. And we can argue about that or talk about that in another show. But I asked Andrew and Wes, what are some of the metrics? Same questions. How do you illustrate or display progress in that left of boom, right? Because a lot of those metrics I just mentioned, and MTTR, right? Tickets, vulnerabilities, vulnerabilities is certainly on left of boom, but how do you, what are your thoughts on that? I don't know if you got a chance to read that, Tim, but.
Yeah, so, I did see it. I was trying to digest it some, I'm always talking about shift left, right? And so it's great that we have Richard here, because I can just ask him the maths question, right? Like, how do I measure left of boom? Well, knock wood, because of our MSP has been so proactive in shifting left and being on that other side with proper documentation, proper procedures, well-trained humans, knock wood, we've not had any major incident. Now that I said that, I probably just jinxed myself. But how do I measure that, right? How do I know, my things are doing what I want them to be doing? What key metrics around that, right? So one thing that our MSP does, right, is we keep track of all the phishing stuff, for example, and when we send out campaigns, for example. And so while that might be one of those traditional things, it's actually been really good for us to try to not incentivize, but to reward the good behavior, right? Last month we sent the campaign out and we saw 75% of the people clicked. Okay, that tells us we need to do a better job. And so, during that month, having those educational moments to the next month where it was 1%, right? So you can try to do some of those kinds of traditional things. But when we're thinking left of boom and documentation and policies and procedures and educating the human, it's hard to pull out metrics and KPIs, right? It's even harder when you start talking about data, when you start talking about where is this information, right? And kind of how do we track that? Do we even know where our data is and the key factors around that? Chris, I bet you could talk a little bit about, I don't know, what is an email address worth on the black market right now on the dark web? Is it $1? I think it used to be $1.20 per email address, right?
Yeah, sure. I guess the point that I would focus on here for a conversation like this is everybody spends a lot of time putting up their castle walls with their block and tackle tools of preference and measuring the results there. And but they always forget to ask themselves, well, what exactly are we trying to protect and why? And so it's all about offering the MSP the opportunity to have the insights and visibility to their customers' data in order to focus their best efforts in terms of where they and how they spend their time for their customers to get the best results. So it needs to be a focus on, again, shift to the left, and focus on data visibility and insights so that any time spent is spent to the best possible efforts.
Gotcha. That's interesting. So, Tim, I think you had another slide. Did you have another slide? Am I like, yeah.
Yeah, so this is another slide. Rob Black, who is in that VC, so you work with him, Tim, but he mentions here, like every other industry talks about metrics, HR, customer success, sales. But when it comes to cybersecurity, like I said, this is a little bit of an emerging space. Like we don't have really good data and statistics on, what mattered to the C-suite, what mattered to a business owner. So, he came back and he had, dollars required to significantly mitigate asset compromise. I'm just reading ahead here, but that kind of goes to what Chris just said. So like, where's my risk, right? He talked about like, what's my important data? And this is what Rob mentions as well. Like, if you don't know the business and you don't know the data, and Tim talks about doing data diagramming and data flows with his cohort, right? Like, how do you know which data you're protecting, and how do you know where that data is, and then where, how can I start to assign values or trends or gain insights, right? So I think this is a good place for Phil to talk about. He's pretty in depth in this on a day-to-day basis. But Phil, what are your thoughts on actually building metrics, or like what kind of data, or how can you get data discovery or data-backed insights that actually move or engage, right, those leaders?
Yeah, great point. I'm in agreement with everyone what we're saying so far here. I'm not going to speak to the metrics specifically because I think there's bigger brains in the room that can kind of codify this down better than I can. I look at things more from like the umbrella that those KPIs and those metrics sit within, right? Like context is king. And to the points about protecting your data, like the metrics that matter, well, what's going to keep me up at night? What's going to put my business turn the lights out, right? So if we're aware of the volume and the distribution of sensitive data, if you can put a cost factor to that, that's powerful, right? If I find 67,000 credit card numbers distributed across my environment, well, what does that really mean? Right? If someone clicks on a phishing link, if a system gets compromised, it's going to cost me something now or moving forward. And when the data is involved, that's a very long pole conversation. If you don't understand it, you don't really know when and what that impact is going to be. Most people running businesses today, it's the data impact that's going to be the biggest financial cost, right? And some people are in business to change the world and make things better. Most people are trying to drive revenue and make money, so it's all about the money. Right? Like if you're in a utility, that's a little bit of a different story, right? Systems go down, that can have potentially dangerous and far-reaching consequences. So you need to be aware of that as well. That's getting all around access.
Any good proxies, Phil? Like breach reports, things in the industry that like people leverage or like kind of build upon? Anything out there?
Verizon puts out quite a lot of good research. I know IBM does a really good job in terms of putting out cost of breach research. So I like to simplify it. I mean, it's a lot more in depth than what I'm going to go into here. But think about a real world cost of ownership when a data breach is involved, right? So like a simple example, we had a large grocer in the area that was breached within the last year. Just one of the factors, they had a lot of their employee data caught up in that breach. Just one of the factors therein, they're on the hook for a very costly set of identity theft insurance. Right now, IBM's also maintaining this team. They're looking at organizations across domains, and they're looking at what did it cost us based on our downtime? What did that breach cost us in terms of customer churn and customer loss? Right? There's a myriad of different factors here that can all be distilled down to the data. And quite frankly, like you need a team of experts to be able to distill that over time. And then to Tim's point originally, right? If I have an email address breached versus a social security number or credit card number, not everything is going to be the same. And certainly not everything is going to be the same across industries, right? If a convenience store gets breached versus a large bank gets breached, the data is going to be the same, but the impact is going to be widely different. So the metrics that you're using, again, context is going to be king there. And then getting that out, it's kind of about the umbrella terms, right? Does this come back to the volume and distribution of your data? Does this come back to the known exploitable sense of configuration and vulnerabilities? Are you looking at the configuration of the services and the systems that the data sits on? And do you know who's actually working with it? Now, if those are your umbrellas and all of your KPIs fit nicely under them, this is like a simplification, right? You're having a real world conversation with your customers on things that matter. Now, to be fair, I'm biased. I'm on the left side of boom, or the preventative side, to Tim's point, right? If we're minimizing and mitigating all along, when that breach happens, we're going to be in the best possible position we can be, because frankly, we're never going to have zero liability. We're never going to have zero risk of exposure to that liability, because that means I'm deleting all my data and I'm throwing all my assets in the garbage, right? So I just shut the business down right there. So I have to live with risk. So it all becomes about measuring it.
Mm-hmm.
We got a good post here. Tim, you'd have to share it, but my favorite kickoff is where your crown jewels when it comes to data.
I guarantee that's Keith, right? So Keith Nelson, I would imagine, is over on Facebook. We keep telling him to come join us over here on LinkedIn. That's fine. We can pull it up here. Facebook user, I guarantee that's Keith, because we love Keith, and Keith always puts that kind of stuff in here. But yeah, where are the crown jewels when it comes to data?
Yeah, and I think for people just getting started with metrics and quantifying things, that is a great way to begin to assess extinction level events. And so if you're not to this point in your program where you have really good dollar metrics and you know where the data is, that's where you start, is what would constitute a catastrophic loss for this business, and what does it take to mitigate that, and is it digestible within our budget, or do we need to increase our budget? And that's a great place to start, and it gets people thinking in terms of risk. And again, I think even for board reporting, that's helpful.
Yeah, I think it's the concept of risk is everywhere in enterprise, and it's not so prevalent in outsourced IT. Right, Jesse? I mean, like getting this concept of measuring it and having some kind of trend, right? Like, even if the numbers are wrong, but if you could still see relative direction, or are we making progress, or are we not making progress, is important. There was another comment in there as well. Sorry, Jesse. But Andrew Solsky on Wes Spencer's post was talking about insurance rates, like year over year, right? Like, so it's one back. Yeah. So, insurance rates year over year are kind of a pretty good, I mean, clearly the insurance market's moving, but like, are you not getting insurance? Were you getting insurance and you're not getting insurance anymore? Are your sublimits better? Things like that. We've had some insurance episodes, but like, clearly that's another metric of how well am I doing? What controls are in place given the current cybersecurity environment? Is that adequate or not? So,
right.
Sorry, Jesse, go ahead.
No, I was just going to kind of adding on to that, and adding on to Phil's comments is, it doesn't have to be super complex, especially when you're talking to your non-technical audience. You want to give top level statistics, like how safe are we versus how safe we were last quarter, and show a trend line there, up or down, and then have heat maps of different domains that show that. And then talk about budget. Where are we at with our budget? Are we on track for our budget? Are we on track with our initiatives? Are we on track with moving things forward? If not, why not? And then any sort of existential threats to the business based on industry. So what are the things we should be worried about that are new today that weren't new yesterday? And I think that's something that's maybe a little bit specific to cyber, is that the ground is shifting quickly, and it does change. So we may not have perfect financial data for a new threat, but we have to look at the fact of how likely is this threat to cause a catastrophic loss to our business. And based on how likely that is, we have to make an educated risk decision as a team with how much we can either increase or decrease our budget, or move money in our budget around to accommodate that. And I think, again, that's where budget, I think, needs to really be a part of your report when you're talking to executive teams and boards and saying, hey, this is what our budget looks like. This is what we're forecasting, but we might need to account for any, have a war chest for certain threats that pop up along the way.
Hey, Tim, I got something for Phil.
Yeah. Rich,
I want to talk about.
jump in here.
He mentioned how IBM just released the cost of a data breach, and within that report, they released some recommendations, the best bang for your buck, to reduce the impact of the data breach and to reduce the time to find those data breaches. Number one being instant response. So that would be the first area you would want to put some metrics to track how well your instant response is performing. The second one being DevSecOps. We're talking about moving things to the left. DevSecOps is, by definition, moving things to the left and picking up things early, tracking metrics there to see how well you're performing there. And then thirdly, and this is kind of another meta conversation as well, is AI and automation. A lot of these metrics want to be generated and tracked through AI. And by using that, that is also going to reduce the cost and the impact of data breach.
Rich, what are some of those sources or tools you would use to? Are they built into the vendors, or are they outside of vendors? Like, what are some of the AI tools specifically that can drive those metrics?
Well, it depends on what types of tools you're using. I mean, Splunk, for instance, has an ML toolkit that you can use on some of that log data to track patterns, to find things that are abnormal. You can write your own custom machine learning algorithms depending on what type of team you have and their development capabilities. It is very tool dependent. Some tools have better tools than others to track some of these metrics, but you can always write these custom things yourself.
Awesome. Yeah.
So a comment just came in. I think it was pertaining to a little bit about what Dr. Miller was talking about. Justifying the position, making a 180. Like, maybe you want to chit chat a little bit about this and answer this live.
Yeah, I think if you say it out loud, that type of thing, it can really bring a lot of decisions into context. And from a technical perspective, as security professionals, sometimes we can get dogmatic about recommending things and saying we need to do this because it makes us more secure. Well, have we exercised due care and due diligence in terms of vetting the actual spend and maybe a myopic focus on something that isn't accounting for the broader perspective of risk within the business? And so asking those types of questions, I think, can kind of help people pick their head up a little bit and look around and be more empathetic in terms of have organizational empathy, what I like to call.
Right.
Yep.
And to put that in like practical terms, right? When we do risk analysis, risk registers and stuff like that, and we're looking at the business as a whole, we might come across a Windows XP machine that is completely isolated, that runs one little program that isn't connected to the internet, that only has one human doing one thing one day a month. Like, yeah, it's a Windows XP machine. It's bad, like, whatever. But in the overall business risk, doesn't really matter because it's not connected to we risk it out because it isn't a thing. Like, it's not on the internet. They're literally doing one little task. And so, us as MSPs need to take that holistic approach of identifying the best ROI, the best bang for the buck, like all of that stuff, right? Like, patch them forever, right? So, we need to understand the business level conversations, and I think we're gonna have one of those sessions coming up here in a couple of weeks. Probably bring our good friend Wes, or maybe Alex or Kyle, or a couple of other really smart people on around. How do you get a seat at the table? So we'll have some conversations around that, but not for today. So,
Tim, there's one more post here, and someone laid it in the comments just literally an hour before, and I was talking to Mark Harless earlier in the week. It's a former FBI guy. There's the quote, and he actually formalized this much better today in a white paper.
Yeah,
exactly what you just said, Tim. Right, like, let's identify the risks that are important to your business. And this is where I wish industry did a better job. Like, I wish insurance published, like, retailers, lawyers, whatever it may be. You guys are all like, what are the risks specific to your industry? Those are the things that, like, business owners and C-suite, like, they don't want to be left behind, right? Like, if you're doing, as Jesse, you just said, what's the minimum, like, do care, right? Duty of like, what's our minimum spend, or like, what are the things that we should be invested in per industry, right? Like, are we stopping credit card theft, right? Like in retail or something like that, or in medical, like what are some of the controls like we have? So that was like one of the first points he talks about. And ConnectWise, Datto, like you guys have these industry reports. If they could have much more specific to the niches, I think that would really drive business owners. You can't just say like 85% of small business owners, like that's not going to get their attention, right? But so that was his first point. Then he's talking about like, all right, as you said, Jesse, we've gotten ownership on board with making that investment. Now, how do we measure like how our investment is performing in those specific, controls, or the things we spent on, the tools, the people, the things like where the framework we're chasing, right? Like, what's the progress there? That's when you start to get into the more technical, and you get away from the non-technical, but they also see the trend of like, oh, you guys are making progress here. Right. And then the last thing he talks about is compliance. A lot of our listeners work in industries that don't have a really strong compliance framework, but needless to say, like they need to know that they're always meeting that. So that's when those metrics can come in terms of a compliance perspective. But I think for a lot of our listeners in the channel, we talk about CIS all the time, and CIS is just a good prescriptive framework, right, Tim? Get you going in the right direction, and they can feel good about like taking a ton of risk off the board just by reading it.
Yeah. So there's definitely some interesting points here that Mark makes, right? And I'm going to talk about the compliance pieces here for a minute, right? And so you hear me say this all the time, like IT professionals, service providers, MSPs, we tend to get scared away when we hear the word compliance, right? We tend to think about like, oh my gosh, the laws, the fines, the regulation, the stuff, the actual work that needs to like happen, right? And I think that's a bigger challenge in the industry is like MSPs are busy. They have a lot of things going on. They don't have the right people and the right processes in place to deal with these kinds of things. They just want tools to check box, to do things, to do stuff like, and all that stuff is great. Having this, automated stuff, having these alert stuff. But as, Dr. Miller always points out, like, have your people, have your process, have a plan in place, right? Right, Jesse?
Yeah, I think this is a great segue because I wanted to just kind of read off my SOP. Like, you know me, I'm Mr. Template, right? So I have templates for everything. And I have guidelines that I use with my customers on what types of metrics to include for what type of audience. And so I'm just going to read those off quickly. So you have your performance audit analysis and report, and that's targeting your IT and IS management. And the three things you want to think about in that report is how are you doing on your tactical execution of your cyber initiatives? How are the security tools and vendors you have performing performance management, right? The details of MTTD, MTTR, all those things. And then the cyber project management, any initiatives, issues, your day-to-day operation stuff. Now that's for that level that you're talking to. Then moving on up in the stack, you have executive and IT leadership who may be more technical, more involved on the tactical operation of the business. And that is where you want to start talking about budget status, target metrics for budget, critical risks and program performance, and then progress, pivots, and adjustments in your overarching roadmap for the year. Right. And then moving on up to board and executive level. And you may have some people in two of these meetings. You kind of find a spectrum of people that straddle there. But again, in the board meeting, then you're just doing a current cyber roadmap and status. Where are we now? Where are we yesterday? Why did it go up or down? And then your risk landscape and your plan of action for mitigation. Right. I always say don't come with problems, come with solutions. Here's where we see some problems in our program. Here's the steps we're taking to address them. Either we need budget or we don't, or we shifted some budget, just the TLDR. And then finally, the program summary metrics and top level wins, losses. Hey, we had this problem to demonstrate what you're asking for will be successful based on your previous performance. And I think those, if you view those 3 levels within the organization, and the way you design your metrics and the way you bring your reports is how you're going to be most successful in bringing consensus throughout all the levels of the organization.
That was awesome, and I'm glad that I put you full screen. I'm glad that I put you full screen so that we can crop you out of there later. But Jesse, what I think I heard you say was, how do we operationalize this as an MSP, right? How do we get into what are those meaningful metrics, right? How do we deal with, like, I don't care about ticket counts, and neither does your client. I don't care about, like, yeah, I talked earlier about who clicked phishing emails and who didn't. Well, yes, that is an important factor. But what are we, as we start to think about what are the key metrics, how do we operationalize that? I think the 6 of us here, at least, the 5 other smarter people than me, I think we could talk a little bit about that, right? What are these key, meaningful metrics?
Yeah, no, I think we kind of covered most of these so far, Tim, right? Like total risk outstanding, right? Like it would be great to know, like, what are my competitors doing? What are my peers doing? What is the industry doing? There's not a lot of that out there. I mean, the IBM and the Verizon reports are pretty wide, and they do have different numbers, and Phil can correct me, I think, on like a social security number is more detrimental than a credit card number, or, whatever the business specifically talks about is important. So I had a good analogy, I think, when we jumped in, Tim, and I think the car this morning, I was like, a doctor doesn't use metrics that well, right? Like, so like you get blood work. I get a cholesterol number. I don't know if that's a good number or a bad number. Is that good? How am I doing? Right. Liver enzymes, iron, like, they explain it to you like in terms that the non-technical, the non-medical person can understand. So I think the C-suite and business owner needs to basically engage with risk, right, that you can actually talk about that are specific to the industry.
So you talk about specific for the industry, right? And I'm gonna put Chris and Phil on the spot here, and then I'm gonna put Richard to kind of counterbalance this, right? So Chris, Phil, right? We know that Cavello deals a lot with data, right? We know that they deal a lot with data discovery, which also means probably on the back end, what's out there, right? Or at least your MSP clients, your enterprise clients, they're starting to do the data discoveries. Like, at the end of the day, this ransomware, these hacks, this whatever, like, it all boils down to the data, right? And maybe you can talk a little bit about, like, how you're doing and what you're doing with some of that data stuff, right? And how that, like, we can pull some metrics out of that so we can have that intelligent conversation. I know when I speak to my client and I say, listen, email addresses are worth $1.20 and you have 100,000 of them. When you get ransomware because they know it, right? So maybe you can talk a little bit about that, Chris and Phil.
Yeah, sure. Really, from an MSP standpoint, traditionally an MSP has sort of stopped at the endpoint, and they've never really been able to look inside the customer's endpoint, understand what the customer has in terms of important, private, and sensitive data. But that is changing, right? That is a necessity in today's environment because people really need to understand where the liability and risk is, and it is all about the data, always has been. It's just people are coming to that realization now. As an MSP, we don't get points for doing simple patches. We get points for protecting our customers' liability and risk. So you need to understand where their pockets or aggregations of important, private, and sensitive data are, and then understand how that information is potentially at risk, and of course, what to do about it, and understand who has access to it and how they might have been using it, so that you can take that information and understand everything about the data and how to spin that into an important program, and then how to communicate what you're doing for your customer because of what has been realized about that customer environment. It's a pretty straightforward concept, but it is a bit of the pointy end of the spear in the industry, because to date, MSPs have been scared to go beyond the endpoint and into the world of their customers' lives in terms of what's private, sensitive, and important. More often than not, their customers don't even have an idea. So if the MSP can bring that information forward with hard data and facts, they look like magicians.
I want to pull a key part out of what you just said and come back to it after we give Phil a chance to respond. And I don't want to lose this. And that is, MSPs are scared to get into their customers' stuff, right? I want to get back to that here in a few minutes, but I want to give Phil a chance and opportunity to respond to what you were just talking about.
Yeah, these are fantastic points, guys. So, I mean, I would argue like MSPs need to get into their customers' stuff, right? Like when we're talking about protecting data, I use an analogy, right? You know, rewind the clock back, 10, 20 years, all of the data was on a server running in a basement or on-prem somewhere. You knew where everything was, right? It was a limited set of data. You fast forward to now, everything generates data. We don't have data in one place. We have multiple cloud services. We have multiple on-prem, co-located virtualization. We've got employees working all over the world, connecting to various things, maybe through a VPN, maybe not. So data sprawl is unmanageable, right? And as an MSP, an MSSP, your customers are looking to you as the thought leaders, right? They want you to be in the driver's seat, and they need you to help them understand what enough is. And I make the joke, right? Like enough is a bit of a four-letter word in the security space, but enough is the target, right? Like there's a joke in the thread about like just patch all day, every day, but no, right? Like there's a point where if you're heat mapping things and you understand where your priorities are, and if you're trending things down, LOB is all about measurement. ROB is all about wargaming and testing the efficacy of the actions that you've taken based on those measurements. And at some point, you hit a plateau where enough is enough, right? Like a simple analogy is like there are some things that I'm going to make sure are inside my home and locked under lock and key every single night. And there's some things that's fine to sit in the shed and fine to sit on the front porch. And yes, there is more risk of someone walking across and opportunistically taking those things, but I've accepted that risk. I've measured that risk, right? I've had that conversation. It's going to be an unfortunate day. I got to go replace one or two things, but that's the cost of living my life, and that's the cost of doing business.
Yeah, good stuff. Good stuff. And so, Rich, you were just talking about
great comment there too. Yeah, CIS 1 and 2, right? If you don't know, you don't know you're protecting it. Good luck, right? So,
yeah.
In terms of knowing when's enough, Rich, being the math guy here, how do we know when is enough, or what's a way to start getting more qualitative or quantitative about that?
Well, you put that in great terms. And also what you did earlier, Jesse, was lay out how there are different layers of collecting and maintaining these metrics. And Tim, you used the example of getting that blood work done and how that number doesn't really have much meaning if you're not in the know. I think it's a common problem that we work in this very complex world, and we want to do things in a complex way, and we need to be very wary of that. So at that top level, when we're displaying that data to leadership, we want to make sure that we put that back in terms of qualitative terms. Is this a bad problem, or is it just a small problem? High, medium, low has meaning, as long as there's something underneath of it that does have a quantification to it. I think that was the biggest point I wanted to make. Tim, you also mentioned some math phobia there. You should be careful about how complex you are using formulas. We are 50% higher than we were last month. That can be confusing for some people. So you want to be very wary of using metrics like that and keep it very simple. Counts, percentages of, be careful with percentage above or percentage below. Keep things very simple. Green, yellow, red. Like I said, things are very complex. And when you want to take a glance at how things are doing, it's a lot easier to do so in qualitative terms.
Yeah, I think those green, yellow, red is a great dashboard that's effective to like a C-suite, right?
All right.
Like,
Wait.
Yeah, I'm ready.
We talk about this all the time, like red, yellow, green. Like I get it. TLP protocol, the traffic light protocol. It's really great from a visual perspective. right? But to break it down, our clients don't care about the nuance, right? So yes, maybe I am converting to the red, yellow, green concept a little bit. Yeah, I get it, like the little thermometer. So, up until maybe 20 minutes ago, I've always been the like, hold up. I don't like pretty charts and graphs because they're just a waste. And you know what? Sometimes these charts and graphs can get us into trouble. They can give us a false sense of security around, hey, look at me, I'm 3/4 green. Yeah, but you're only 3/4 green on this one little thing. Your overall stuff in your score is like all in the red. And so, as much as I love to do the red, yellow, green, sometimes it can get us into trouble, right?
Well, yeah, and I think you're right about that, Tim. And I think it goes back to what Rich was saying is, you depending on the audience, if it's just the business, right, give them those quick, digestible bites, but be ready with your math and with your reasoning and with your quantitative data should people want to dig in. So I think keep it top level and dive down when they're ready. It's the same with the doctor analogy that Tim mentioned. Is my cholesterol level good or bad? And the doctor says it's good. Well, if it's a nurse that's his patient and he says, well, what are the exact numbers? I want to know what those numbers are. He said, okay, well, here's the numbers, right? But this is where we start, and we only dive deep when it's requested.
Right. Know your audience.
Yep.
Know your audience. So a pretty lengthy one just came in here real quick. Let's pull
And
this
that comment, you said you're going to circle back to seat at the table, and I think this starts to really segue into that.
So I'll leave this up here for a minute for all of us, slow readers to read it.
Yeah, I think you're not doing your client or yourself any favors by pretending things are good. It's actually something I wanted to talk about when we were talking about metrics with the board. You can't be scared to say, hey, we're worse than we were last month or last quarter, right? Because that's kind of people sit up in their chairs, right? Why? Well, why are we worse? So, but you better be ready to prove that it's not your fault, of course, right?
Yeah,
but
it's a macro. It's a macro.
Well, and there are
event, right?
trade-offs, right? There are trade-offs. You could be worse in one area because in order to get better in a different one. And explaining those trade-offs is very important. That's part of managing risk and helping facilitate that risk management for leadership. For clients.
So
big difference on that outsource and enterprise, right? Like if you're an outsourced IT provider, you don't want that liability, right? There's a risk register. You want them to start to accept risks. Enterprise, it's on you. Like there's no like, oh, hey CEO, put that in the risk register. That doesn't go well.
Right. Well, I think that's the context of Paul's comment here, right? So not talking to them, right? He goes on to talk about BCDR and blah 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 and all that kind of stuff, right? But not talking to them about the risk actually puts your own company as an IT provider, as an MSP at risk. Right. And so, and I get it, like there's been no real good way to identify those risks, bring it to your client and let them either accept or not accept those risks. Right. Thankfully, there's a tool for that. But, I think the context of what Paul is saying here is you want to make sure that you're identifying these risks and you're informing your clients of those risks and you're shifting that risk off of yourself and onto the clients. I think that might be part of what Paul's trying to get at here in this context.
Yeah.
Well, it's it's something I maybe bring up too much. I wouldn't say I bring it up too much, but some people might say I bring it up too much. Is that from a managed services point, when you're doing risk assessments and you're quantifying and qualifying your customer's risk, you're protecting yourself. It's a liability shield for you in a lot of ways. And I think he strikes right at the heart of that when he says, if you're ignoring risk, risk appetite. When you're ignoring risk, you're accepting it for your clients, which means that you've just transferred it from your clients to yourself. And that's a position nobody wants to be in.
Yeah. Here's another great comment. I think this is Adam over on Facebook, Adam Walter from Humanize IT. I think that might be him, since I'm not on Facebook, but I'm assuming that's who it is. But yeah, not only are we identifying, multiple different risks across the business, but then prioritizing. I think Jesse, your SOP kind of talked a little bit about that, right? And so, Rich, when we think about prioritizing risk, right? There's risk calculations. There's the maths, right, Rich? There's the maths to figure that out, right? And so maybe you could talk a little bit about like, how is an MSP? How can we operationalize that? Like business impact versus this divided by that times the square root of the. I'm already.
So rephrase your question.
So when we think about how do we help calculate risk and then try to prioritize the risk, like what kinds of things could we be looking at as an MSP for the data points to figure out, like, all right, let's just go right to it. Business impact analysis. Right?
That was going to be my response. That's where it begins with the business impact analysis, going through the inventory of those business processes, and then coming up with useful metrics to measure the different impact, management time, cost, compliance, and actually fleshing out those metrics within the business impact analysis and making it specific to each business process. When I began doing business impact analysis, I tried to put everything into the same different categories, but it doesn't always fit that way. So each business process should have those different metrics related to the business process.
That's really great. And so, I do spend a lot of time in BIAs, shameless plug, in our peer group teaching BIAs, business impact analysis. The interesting part is that it's very specific to that one client. While there are some pieces within verticals, some dials and some levers that we can pull in a vertical, it's really all about that client. And I think, as Paul put over here, really about their risk appetite around that too, right? And so there's a bunch of good formulas and spreadsheets, and I bet Rich has a bunch of things that could help us with how do we figure out this risk appetite? Like, how do we put monetary value to the Windows XP machine down the hall, right? We talked about this 20 minutes ago. That machine serves a very specific function in the business. And if we can't perform that function in this business, we might as well go out of business, right? And so doing those calculations, understanding that the machine is highly at risk, but without it, we don't exist, right? So, it's interesting to figure out BIA. It's interesting to figure out risk appetite. It's a game that I play a lot. I think Rich, for those that, Rich, if you want to drop your LinkedIn in the comments, might be a really good opportunity for you all to reach out to him directly, since he's our, police officer, FBI, SWAT math guy on the call, right? So we're coming down here on the last 8 minutes. I'm going to kind of poke over in some of the comments while you guys all talk about, other stuff and see what I might have missed in the comments.
Yes. So, and Rich, I know one way coming back to the cyber insurance, right? Like clearly they're putting their money where their mouth is. They're saying, we'll protect you if you pay this. And clearly, they're not perfect. The applications aren't as in depth as we want them to be. But I think you spoke recently on cyber insurance at a lecture somewhere. But any kind of insights on that, right? That, I think, because that ultimately that dollar value of risk, like they are essentially putting their, they're taking on your risk for a price. Clearly there's sublimits and they're complicated. But I think that's a real catalyst for small businesses specifically, right? That just, they're like, oh, I'm not going to get struck by lightning, or I'm not going to worry about this. That's a real kind of like red herring that like, hey, I might have a problem here. I need to do something about it. So any thoughts on that? I'd love to kind of, I don't know what that lecture was. I wish it was a fly on the wall, but.
Well, first of all, let us remember that business or cyber insurance, that is categorized under risk transfer. right? That is an option of responding to risk. You can mitigate the risk, you can avoid the risk, you can accept the risk, you can ignore the risk, which is not advisable, or you can transfer the risk. And that's the $1 billion question: is how do we start quantifying this risk in terms of cyber insurance, in terms of transferring? So I've been talking to some actuaries on this topic, and actuaries are people that work for insurance companies that use mathematical modeling to predict outcomes of bad things happening, so that insurance companies can expect what they're going to have to pay in the case of something bad happening. There's not a lot of data in this cyberspace. Even the reports that we talked about from IBM, from Verizon, that's just what has been reported. There's a lot of things that have gone unreported. There have been ransomware attacks that have happened where people have just paid the ransom, where people have paid the ransom and have been hit again. So there's not a lot of data there. Whoever starts to bring that in to reduce premiums and to reduce the likelihood of these things happening, it's just a huge problem that somebody is working on right now. There are several people working on this now to give people a better cyber insurance experience.
Yeah, and obviously the data is typically insurance looks way back. Oh, hurricanes, 100 years, 50 years, 25 years.
Hundreds of years of data. Yeah.
Right. And insurance, cyber insurance, it's like, well, there was this thing called the pandemic, which dramatically altered like network security. We can go down that road, right? So there's all these moving pieces, and adversaries are fluid. They're responding, and they're crafty. So, yeah, I don't know where that data, but I would love for the insurers to kind of talk about industries specific. Even it might not be the insurers, maybe it's somebody else, maybe it's like industry specific, right? Like there needs to be some way for business owners to know kind of like where they are, like what's par and what's enough.
Sure. And let us not, it's no different in this situation. Insurance is something that you have to have that you never want to use, and you avoid using it by assurance, by doing some of the things that we've talked about on the governance, risk, and compliance side. There are some efforts to bridge that gap to say, okay, you are doing some of these assurance measures, so thus we're going to give you a better coverage. We're going to reduce your premium, but there's still a lot of work to be done in that area.
Yep. Tim, we're getting close to the hour here, so we want to wrap up. And Rich, we're probably going to have you back on in the future, because I want to talk about sizing insurance. Because people just get insurance and they're like, give me $1 million. And it's like, what does that have to do with the business and the value of the business? So
right.
We'll come back to that in a couple of weeks, maybe. Go ahead, Tim.
So we're winding down here. Something new that we're going to try is like, hey, key takeaways. So this is kind of one of our first opportunities to provide you, our listeners, the MSPs, the enterprise clients, when we look at what we've talked about today, it's been a really great session. We only barely started to scratch the surface of what this looks like. And so we kind of came up with a couple of key takeaways. I feel like there's a lot more. So I'm not going to read the slide and insult your intelligence, but I'm going to kind of pull us all up here real quickly, and we can talk briefly about all of us. What does this look like? And I don't know why my browser's freezing, but
that slide's going over. So we can kind of talk to it, but that third sentence I don't know why it didn't get updated. So
good. So let's spend the last 1 minute or so, everybody going around the room. I'm going to ask you each for one key takeaway, and I'm going to start with I'm going to take the top left square for $100. Rich.
Keep things simple. Keep reporting simple. Make sure that your audience understands what you are communicating in terms of taking the pulse on these different metrics that we're talking about.
Nice. Chris.
Understand what's important in the business, understand how it's vulnerable and what to do about it, and how to effectively communicate that to your customers in relation to how you're doing it for them.
Nice. Phil.
Yeah, exactly that. Measure your data, understand the risk of exposure to it, and define when enough is enough.
That's great. Dr. Miller.
Think like a copywriter. Echoing what everyone said, but focus in on your ICP, know what matters to them, and build compelling stories with the data for the different personas that you're talking to in the organization.
Oh my God, I'm going to steal that. Tim.
Yeah, so think, try to get industry specific, I think, and that is difficult, but think outside the box. Where can I get data, breach data specifically for retail or lawyers or medical or things like that? They need to start to think about, am I keeping up with my peers? Am I keeping up with my competitors? And that data, will start to drive those initial conversations, which I think are the hardest. Jesse talked about once they're on board, it's like, how are we doing from a progress perspective? But how do we get them thinking about, like, where am I relative to everybody else, right? I think that's important. So,
as always, Tim, you're more than your one sentence, but you're good. So, we're wrapping this up. Great conversation about understanding key metrics, having those conversations with your clients. My key takeaway is get away from the bytes and bits and get into the business conversation. As an MSP, a technical guy myself, I know it's hard. But hopefully in the coming weeks on Team Live here, we're going to give you some key factors to get a seat at the table. Stop nerding out and start getting into business conversations.
next week, Tim, who we got?
We have, I believe, Marnie from Lifecycle Insights, and talking about customer success and QBRs and all kinds of fun stuff. Marnie's now got her 7 millionth book out or whatever. So we're looking forward to having Marnie on. Obviously, our great friends at Lifecycle Insights. Maybe she'll give away a free book. I don't know. I'll throw that out there. But we appreciate everybody being here this week. Do the like, subscribe, ring the bell, Jesse kind of things, right? So, and guess what? We've now hit the right amount of followers so that we can stream this live on Team Tim's page, as opposed to Tim's page. So thank you everybody that has already subscribed. Now we can separate this out of our businesses and make it the thing that it's supposed to be. So I'm Tim Golden, founder of Compliance Risk, Tim Schnur from Cavello, and Dr. Jesse Miller from Power PSA. Wrapping up this week. We'll see you same bat time, same new bat channel on teamtim.live. So thanks everybody. Have a great week.
Thanks, Tim.